Why was the wind so loud, when everything else was dead quiet? The desert stretched out like a forgotten graveyard. Broken vehicles, scorched earth, and silence, except for that insistent wind scraping dust against steel. Captain Lena Torres crouched low, fingers buried in cold grit, her breath shallow under a helmet that suddenly felt too heavy. The comms in her ear were silent now. Dead silent. And that silence was worse than the gunfire that had ripped through her convoy minutes ago. She blinked grit from her lashes. Her pulse hammered not from fear but from something else, something deeper. Anger. No, defiance. A rebellion that refused to stop beating even when the battlefield had become a graveyard. Somewhere out there someone was still alive. She had to believe that. A faint crackle of static teased her headset, then nothing. She swallowed hard, tasting metal and dust. The radio was fried, or jammed, or maybe the voices on the other end weren't there anymore. She reached for the sidearm at her hip, fingers trembling just enough to betray what she wouldn't say aloud. She was alone. But she wasn't supposed to be. They had mocked her at the briefing table earlier, quietly, politely, but she'd seen the sidelong glances. A woman at the head of a recon team in this sector. The older sergeant had muttered something about optics under his breath. Lena had pretended not to hear, kept her gaze on the map, tracing the planned route with her finger. But deep down, she felt the weight of every doubt in that room. And yet when the ambush hit, when the first RPG screamed in and turned the lead vehicle into a ball of fire, it was her voice that cut through the chaos. Calm, precise orders. It wasn't bravado. It was survival. Now survival was all that remained. She crept forward on her belly, using the burnt-out husk of a troop carrier as cover. The smell of charred rubber and diesel clung to her throat. A shadow shifted 50 yards ahead, too fluid to be debris. Enemy, or one of hers, crawling for help. She froze, the world shrinking to the slow beat of her heart. There was something she hadn't told them, not yet. 2 days ago, before this mission, a coded message had come through channels not meant for her. It mentioned a name she hadn't heard in years, a name that still hurt to think about. But that message had been deleted. Officially, it didn't exist. And now she was here, stranded because she hadn't been able to walk away. Another shadow moved, and the memory of that name burned behind her eyes. She whispered to herself, barely audible, Santiago. The wind stole the word. A faint moan cut through the silence, a man's voice, weak, strained. It was coming from the wreckage ahead. Lena's chest tightened. She crawled faster, each movement careful to keep her silhouette low. The voice grew clearer, help here. She spotted him, Corporal Dunn, his leg pinned beneath a twisted axle. His face was pale, blood pooling in the dust beneath him. Relief and dread hit her in equal measure. I've got you, she said, her voice firm but soft. His eyes flicked open. He managed a half smile. Knew you'd make it. Stay with me. She wedged her shoulder under the axle, testing its weight, too heavy. She glanced at the horizon, still nothing but the shimmer of heat. No help, no backup. She thought about leaving him, just long enough to find a better angle, maybe something to use as a lever. But the battlefield was too exposed. If the shooters were still out there, any movement would be a death sentence. Lena, Dunn's voice was barely a whisper. They knew our route. Her stomach dropped. Who, she pressed. But his eyes fluttered shut. A distant crack like a branch snapping. But in this place there were no branches. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She dropped flat beside Dunn, scanning the ridgeline. The sun burned bright overhead, making every shadow treacherous. She waited, listened. Nothing, just the wind again. Her thoughts drifted to the name in the message, to Santiago. Years ago, before the war had carved its scars into her, she'd been part of a different unit, a special reconnaissance detachment. Santiago had been her spotter back then. Brilliant, reckless, loyal, and dead, or at least that's what they'd told her after the Black Viper operation went wrong. but the coded message 2 days ago had been signed with his call sign. It didn't make sense. She shook the thought away. Focus, one thing at a time. Lena scanned the wreckage for anything useful. An abandoned rifle lay half buried under debris. She slung it across her back, then spotted a length of twisted metal beam, maybe light enough to use as leverage. She grabbed it, wedged it under the axle, and braced her boots against the ground. The strain burned her shoulders, the beam groaning under the weight. "Come on," she muttered through clenched teeth. The axle shifted, just enough. Dunn groaned as she dragged him clear. She pressed a quick bandage to his bleeding leg, then tied it off with a strip of cloth torn from her undershirt. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. "You're not dying here," she whispered. His eyes opened again, glassy. "Promise." "Promise." She knew promises were dangerous on battlefields, but she said it anyway. A low rumble echoed from the east vehicles, not friendly ones. The sound of tires crunching over gravel grew closer. Her mind raced. She could try to carry Dunn, but he was heavy and barely conscious. The ridge offered no real cover. Running blind could mean walking straight into another ambush. She scanned the horizon again. Dust plumes, at least 2 trucks, maybe more. She dragged Dunn into the shadow of a burned-out MRAP, heart hammering, then crouched beside him, rifle ready. The truck slowed. Figures jumped down, silhouettes against the bright sky, armed, organized, searching. Lena took a slow breath. She could feel the tremor in her hands and hated it. She remembered Santiago's voice from years ago, teasing her during sniper training. "Steady hands, Tors. The bullet listens to your heartbeat." Her heartbeat was too loud now. The figures moved closer, scanning wreckage. One of them kicked a helmet aside. Another pointed toward the MRAP. Lena pressed her back to the steel, the smell of soot in her nose, and made a choice. She pulled a small smoke grenade from her vest, one of the few she had left. With a silent prayer, she tossed it to the far side of the wreckage. A hiss, then a plume of gray smoke. The figures shouted, momentarily confused. Lena seized the moment, hoisting Dunn's arm over her shoulders. They stumbled away from the wreckage, low and fast, using the smoke as cover. Each step felt like forever. The ground seemed endless. A bullet snapped past her ear, then another. They weren't fooled for long. She pushed harder, lungs burning, until they reached a shallow depression in the earth. She lowered Dunn gently, pressing him flat against the ground. He groaned, "Leave me." "Shut up," her voice cracked, but she didn't care. She risked a glance over the edge. The figures were fanning out, searching. The sun slid lower, stretching shadows across the desert. Lena's mind raced. There had to be a way out. A canyon lay another 100 yards beyond the ridge. If they could reach it, they might disappear into the maze of rocks. But crossing open ground under watchful rifles was suicide. Her throat tightened. She thought of her sister back home, of the last message she'd sent, promising to be careful to come back. She thought of Santiago, of the message she hadn't told anyone about. Then she noticed something, a glint on the horizon, a mirror flash, a scope. Her breath caught. Someone was out there watching. But the glint wasn't aimed at her. It shifted, tracking the searching figures. A single shot rang out, clean, distant, surgical. One of the enemy silhouettes dropped instantly. The others ducked, shouting, "Another shot, another target down." Lena's heart pounded. Someone was helping her. But who? She scanned the horizon again, but the shooter was invisible. The remaining enemies retreated toward their trucks, dragging their wounded. Within minutes, the desert was quiet again, too quiet. Dunn coughed weakly. "You see that?" "Yeah," she whispered. She waited, scanning, but no more shots came. No figure approached, just silence and wind. Her mind screamed with possibilities. Could it be Santiago? Was that impossible? Or was this another trap, another layer to the ambush? She let the thought linger, then forced herself back to the present. Night was coming fast. The desert would turn cold and cruel. Dunn wouldn't last without better care. She'd need to find water, shelter, maybe a way to call for extraction if anyone was left to hear her. But beneath the exhaustion and fear, something else stirred, a spark of hope. Someone out there was watching, protecting or testing her. She adjusted the strap on her rifle, wiped dust from her lips, and looked out over the battlefield. The graveyard wasn't quiet after all, not completely. Her pulse was still there, steady, defiant, whispering that the fight wasn't over. She stood for a moment, letting the wind whip her hair loose under her helmet. Then she bent, lifted Dunn's arm again, and started toward the canyon. Behind her the wreckage smoldered. Ahead, shadows lengthened and secrets waited in the dark. And somewhere, unseen, a familiar set of eyes was watching her every move. The desert at night wasn't silent, it breathed. Wind whispered through dry gullies. Loose stones shifted under unseen paws. The sky stretched infinite and black, spattered with cold stars. And every sound, every sigh of air, felt amplified against the canyon walls. Lena Torres pressed her back to a boulder, easing Dunn down beside her. His face was ghost-pale in the moonlight. She could feel the tremor in his body even through his body armor. "Still with me," she whispered. He grunted, teeth clenched. "Feels like hell's chewing on my leg." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She tore a scrap from her scarf, tightened the improvised tourniquet. Dunn hissed but didn't complain. "You'll outlive me just to spite me," she said softly. He gave a weak chuckle, then groaned. The sound echoed too loudly. Lena froze, scanning the canyon. Silence again. But her skin prickled, the kind of instinct you learn only after too many deployments. Something was out there, watching. She crouched low, rifle ready, and studied the starlit ridges. A shadow shifted high above, then vanished. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe not. A memory surfaced unbidden. Santiago's voice during a night op years ago, teasing her nerves. "The dark isn't out to get you, Torres. The people in it are." She swallowed hard. The ridge ahead narrowed into a choke point, a perfect place for an ambush. She couldn't risk staying here until dawn, but Dunn couldn't walk far. Her mind traced options like maps. Stay put and risk discovery. Leave Dunn, scout ahead alone. Move both of them now, gamble on stealth. The second option tasted bitter. She'd already promised not to leave him. "Can you stand if I help?" she asked. "Barely." "Barely's enough." She slung his arm over her shoulders, muscles protesting under the weight. Together they stumbled forward, every step a prayer that rocks wouldn't shift loud enough to give them away. The canyon walls rose steep, jagged, catching bits of moonlight on their edges. Somewhere water dripped, a lonely, rhythmic tap that kept time with her heartbeat. Halfway through the choke point, Dunn stumbled, dragging her down with him. They landed hard, dust puffing up. Her rifle clattered on stone. A sound, a distant pebble tumbling, answered. Lena's breath caught. She scanned the shadows. Movement, just a flicker on the ridge, too deliberate to be the wind. She whispered, "Don't move." Dunn froze. Another sound, boots on gravel, light but distinct, above them. Her pulse spiked. Then a voice, low, calm, familiar in a way that hollowed her chest. "Torres." Her knees nearly gave. She angled her rifle upward, voice tight. "Show yourself." A figure emerged from the ridge, outlined by stars, lean, steady, rifle slung low. Santiago. Except that was impossible. He died 5 years ago. She blinked, heart hammering. He climbed down with practiced ease, boots silent on stone. His face came into view, older, rougher, a scar now tracing his cheek, but unmistakable. Her throat tightened. "You're alive." He smiled faintly. "Takes more than Black Viper to kill me." The world tilted under her feet. She wanted to scream or hug him or punch him for letting her mourn him all these years. Instead, she stayed still, gun half-raised, mistrust fighting relief. How? He glanced at Dunn, then back to her. Not here, too many ears in these rocks. Move. His tone was the same as always, calm but commanding. And she hated how easily her muscles obeyed old habits, moving without argument. They followed him deeper into the canyon, Santiago leading with quiet confidence. Dunn groaned with each step, but Santiago didn't slow. At a bend in the canyon, he crouched beside a narrow crevice in the rock, a hidden shelter. A small cache of supplies was tucked inside: water, a lantern, 2 thermal blankets. Lena stared. You planned this. Prepared, he corrected, handing her a canteen. She wanted answers, but Dunn's pallor was worsening. She knelt, unwrapped the bandage, and winced at the swelling. Infection was setting in. Santiago opened a med kit, his hand steady. Hold him. Lena braced Dunn's shoulders while Santiago cleaned and rewrapped the wound. Dunn clenched his teeth against the pain. When it was done, Santiago sat back, wiping blood from his fingers. For a moment, none of them spoke. The canyon outside hummed with distant wind. Finally, Lena broke the silence. They knew our route. Dunn said it before he passed out. Santiago nodded grimly. They knew more than your route. They knew your objective. Her skin went cold. How do you know? Because I've been watching them. She stared. All this time you've been alive out here and you didn't tell anyone. His gaze dropped briefly. Couldn't, not after what I found out. She felt anger rising, anger for the years of grief, for the betrayal of trust. But under it all was something else, a flicker of understanding, because she too had kept secrets. Start talking, she said. He hesitated, then spoke low. Black Viper wasn't a failure by accident. It was a setup. Someone inside wanted our unit erased. I barely crawled out alive. Since then, I've been tracking the same network. And tonight, your convoy was their next move. The canyon felt smaller, the air heavier. Lena's mind reeled. If what he said was true, the ambush wasn't random. Someone inside command had fed them. Why send me? She whispered. He met her eyes. Because they didn't think you'd live. The words hit like a punch. She looked at Dunn, unconscious now, face drawn tight with pain. She looked at the stars overhead, cold and distant. Then she looked back at Santiago. You saved us, she said quietly. His jaw tightened. Not yet. He handed her a folded map, edges frayed. There's an outpost, abandoned on the record, but I've been using it. We can reach it by dawn if we move, but we'll have company. They'll sweep this canyon by first light. She traced the route with her finger. It was dangerous, open stretches of desert, high ground for snipers, and no guarantee of water. She felt the old weight in her chest, the one she used to carry on every mission. Fear and determination braided together. Santiago saw it in her eyes. You don't have to trust me, he said. Just trust your pulse. Her pulse steady, defiant. She folded the map. Dawn then. They settled into uneasy silence. Lena kept watch at the mouth of the crevice, rifle across her lap. The desert stretched infinite beyond. Santiago sat across from her, his face half in shadow. For a long time she didn't look at him. She didn't want him to see the questions in her eyes, or the small, reluctant relief in her chest. But later, when Dunn stirred in his sleep, and the wind whistled through the rocks like a distant warning, she let herself glance at Santiago. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the stars, jaw tight, as if remembering something he'd rather forget. The night felt fragile, like a glass that could shatter with a single sound. And somewhere beyond the canyon walls, engines growled faintly, far enough to ignore for now, close enough to haunt every breath. Lena's fingers traced the grip of her rifle. She thought of her sister's face. She thought of the name Santiago on that long-deleted message. And she thought of tomorrow, the stretch of desert they would have to cross, hunted, bleeding, and unsure of who the real enemy was. But for now, beneath the indifferent stars, she allowed herself one stolen heartbeat of hope. The first light crept across the horizon like a wound opening. Lena Torres tightened the strap on her rifle and squinted into the pale orange glow. The canyon that had seemed protective under starlight now looked exposed, jagged walls offering more places to hide than to run. Santiago was already on his feet, his movements quiet and deliberate. Dunn stirred with a groan, his face pale but determined. "You good to move?" Lena asked gently. "Define good," Dunn rasped. She gave him the smallest of smiles, the kind soldiers trade when the alternative is despair. She and Santiago rigged a makeshift sling from a thermal blanket and spare straps. With Dunn supported between them, they set out, boots crunching softly on gravel. The air was sharp with morning chill, but the heat would rise fast. By midday, the desert would be an oven. They kept to the shadows where canyon walls offered cover. Birds circled overhead, their cries sharp and eerie. Every sound carried in the thin air each step, each loose stone tumbling down a slope. An hour in, they paused behind a boulder to catch their breath. Lena scanned the horizon. The desert beyond the canyon was wide and merciless, broken only by the skeletal remains of an old road that led toward the mountains. Santiago pulled a small pair of binoculars from his vest. He scanned the distance, then froze. "What?" Lena asked. He handed her the binoculars. "Ridge line east, 2 trucks, they're sweeping ahead of us." Through the lenses, she saw them, tiny specks of movement against the rising sun. Not many, but enough. They were cutting off the obvious escape route. "They know where we're going," Lena whispered. Santiago's jaw flexed. "They're hurting us." A knot tightened in her stomach. She adjusted the binoculars, tracking their movement. The truck slowed near a collapsed bridge. Men climbed out 4, maybe 5, setting something up. A trap. She lowered the lenses. "Then we don't go east." "There's no other way," Dunn groaned. Santiago traced a finger across the map, studying the contour lines. "There's a dry riverbed that loops north. Adds 5 miles, but it's rough terrain. They won't expect us to risk it with an injured man." Lena hesitated. Dunn's face was drawn, his breath shallow. 5 extra miles could kill him, but staying on the obvious path meant certain death. She nodded. "North, then." They moved again, cutting away from the road and toward the riverbed. The ground was uneven, littered with jagged stones. Each step sent tiny avalanches of gravel sliding. Lena's shoulders ached from supporting Dunn's weight. By mid-morning, the sun was a relentless white coin overhead. Sweat trickled down her spine. Her lips cracked. Santiago moved ahead, scouting, his silhouette sharp against the blinding sky. They reached the riverbed, a winding scar carved deep into the earth. Its dry banks offered some cover, but its walls were steep and crumbling. They descended carefully, rocks shifting underfoot. Halfway down, Dunn slipped, pulling Lena off balance. She caught herself on a ledge, heart hammering, dust clouding the air. Santiago appeared in an instant, grabbing her wrist. His hand was warm and solid, familiar in a way that hurt. "Got you," he said quietly. She nodded, breathless. "Thanks." They made it to the bottom. The riverbed stretched ahead like a labyrinth, its twists and turns hiding them from view, but also from escape if cornered. As they moved, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every gust of wind through the canyon felt like a breath on her neck. Hours passed. Dunn drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring half-formed words. At one point, Lena caught him whispering a name, his daughter's. The raw humanity of it pierced her chest. She thought of her sister again, of the photo folded in her vest pocket, a snapshot from a summer before everything changed. She remembered the fight they'd had before this deployment, her sister begging her to quit, to come home for good. Lena had said she couldn't, because stopping now would make all the sacrifices meaningless. But in the quiet stretches of the desert, She sometimes wondered if she'd been lying to herself. A distant echo interrupted her thoughts, a low rumble. Engines. Santiago's head snapped up. They're closing in. He scanned the canyon walls. Up there, he said, pointing to a narrow ledge halfway up the bank. We climb now. Lena looked at Dunn. You first, she told Santiago. Pull him up. They worked quickly, Santiago scrambling up the ledge and lowering a strap to hoist Dunn. The injured man groaned but held on. Lena pushed from below, her muscles screaming until Dunn was safe above. Then she climbed, fingers digging into crumbling rock, boots searching for purchase. A shout echoed, a voice from the distance, too close. She hauled herself over the ledge just as a burst of gunfire cracked through the canyon. Dust exploded where bullets struck stone. Run, Santiago barked. They sprinted along the ledge, the world narrowing to the slap of boots on rock and the thunder of blood in Lena's ears. Bullets sparked off the walls, shards of stone stinging her cheek. Ahead, the ledge ended in a sheer drop. Jump, Santiago yelled. Without hesitation, Lena leapt, landing hard on the riverbed below. Pain shot up her knees. Santiago followed, then lowered Dunn down with care. They kept moving, weaving through the twists of the canyon, the gunfire fatting behind them. When they finally stopped, lungs burning, the silence returned. Santiago crouched, checking their bearings. 2 more miles to the outpost. Lena nodded, swallowing dry air. They'll follow. Let them, Santiago said grimly. They pressed on, the sun inching toward the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the sand. As they neared a bend, Lena spotted something half buried in the dirt, an old helmet cracked and rusted. She picked it up, brushing off sand. Inside, faint writing, "Stay human." She stared at it for a long moment. A relic from some forgotten battle. A message from someone who had stood where she now stood, someone who'd wanted to leave a reminder. She set it back down gently. The outpost finally came into view just as the sky bled into twilight. A squat concrete structure half collapsed, its walls scorched. A single rusted antenna jutted skyward. Santiago slowed, scanning the surroundings. Doesn't look occupied. Lena's instincts prickled. Too quiet. They approached cautiously, weapons raised. Inside, dust motes floated in the fatting light. Old cots lined the walls. A broken radio sat on a table, wires dangling. Santiago set Dunn on a cot, then checked the perimeter. Lena knelt by Dunn, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. He stirred, opening his eyes briefly. We make it. For now, she whispered. Santiago returned, his face grim. Tracks outside, fresh. She tensed. How fresh? Hours, maybe less. A low hum reached their ears, distant but growing. Lena's stomach sank. Drones. She met Santiago's eyes. They know we're here. The hum grew louder, then faded, circling, searching. Santiago crouched by the broken radio, fiddling with wires. If I can get this working, maybe we can send a burst signal. Lena paced the room, scanning for exits. Every creak of the building felt like a threat. She glanced at Santiago, the weight of their shared past heavy between them. You disappeared. Let me think you buried. And now this. He didn't look up. I didn't choose this, but if you'd known what I knew, you'd have done the same. Try me, she said quietly. He hesitated, then met her gaze. Someone on the inside is selling names, routes, whole units. Black Viper was the start. Your convoy was just another loose end to tie off. Her chest tightened. Who? I don't know yet, but I will. Outside, the drone's hum faded again, swallowed by the desert wind. Lena looked at Dunn, at the cracked walls around them, at the dying light outside. For a heartbeat, despair threatened to choke her. But then the helmet's message flashed in her mind. Stay human. She gripped her rifle tighter. The battlefield might be a graveyard, but her pulse, steady and rebellious, still refused to stop. The wind carried an edge of frost, biting through the seams of her gloves as Lena slid down the embankment and into the hollowed ruins of what had once been a farmhouse. She stayed low, breath forming thin clouds that dissolved into the ash-gray dawn. Somewhere beyond the shattered walls, a lone crow called, a lonely sound that made the silence heavier. She pressed her back against cold brick, eyes scanning the horizon. The convoy had failed to show. It wasn't like Captain Hayes to miss a rendezvous. The absence felt wrong and familiar. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but recognition. The battlefield had always been this way, full of empty promises and unseen traps. A flicker of movement to her right. She pivoted, rifle raised. Just a rabbit. Its white fur blended with the frost as it darted into the shadows. Still, she didn't lower the weapon. Not yet. The rabbit's sudden flight reminded her of her father's voice. "Don't trust quiet places, Ellie. They only pretend to be safe." The memory stung. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the old ache of abandonment press against the edges of her focus. She had been 13 when the news of her father's disappearance came. A pilot lost on a classified recon flight. No body recovered. No answers. It was the silence afterward that had hurt the most. The way people had avoided her eyes. The way even her mother had stopped asking questions. A crunch of gravel pulled her back. Two figures approached through the mist, Sergeant Malik and Corporal Reyes. Relief flickered in her chest before she caught the tension in their faces. Malik's jaw was tight. Reyes avoided her gaze. "They're gone," Malik said quietly. "Hayes, the convoy, all of them. There's nothing out there but tire tracks heading east. Fast." Lena's throat went dry. East. That meant hostile territory, too far for an extraction. Reyes spoke finally, voice unsteady. "We found a casing, NATO issue. Not ours, it looked planted." Her mind raced. A trap, then. Someone had rerouted Hayes, someone with access to their plans. The weight of betrayal settled like lead in her stomach. She crouched beside the crumbled farmhouse window and peered out. The landscape was bleak, fields of scorched earth stretching to a horizon blurred by fog. Somewhere out there, Hayes and the others might already be ambushed, or worse. "Could be comms interference," Malik offered, but even he didn't believe it. "No," she said, sharper than intended. Then softer, "No, this isn't static. Someone fed them bad intel." Malik exhaled slowly, the vapor of his breath catching the first faint light of morning. "So what's the move?" Lena stared east. The world seemed to hold its breath. Her heart ached, not just for the team, but for the gnawing suspicion that this betrayal ran deeper. Was her father's last flight, lost without answers, part of the same shadow they now faced? She swallowed hard. "We track them, we don't wait for orders." Reyes hesitated. "If we go off script, and this is bigger than it looks." "It's already bigger," she interrupted. "And if we wait, we'll be reading their names off a wall." Silence. Then Malik nodded once. Reyes's eyes flicked between them before settling on Lena. Something softened in her expression, fear tempered by reluctant trust. They moved. Through the ruined fields, across the skeleton of a burned orchard where the trees stood like blackened bones. Every footstep crunched softly on frost and debris. The horizon brightened just enough to reveal the faint line of fresh tracks cutting eastward. Hours blurred. The land shifted, ruins gave way to rocky ridges and dry creek beds. Lena's legs ached, but she forced herself onward. The world felt too quiet. Even the birds had gone silent. By midday they reached the edge of a ravine. Below, a burned-out convoy vehicle smoldered faintly. Smoke curled in thin, ghostly threads. Reyes whispered a curse. Malik's knuckles whitened around his rifle. Lena descended slowly, boots slipping on loose stones. The air smelled of diesel and charred metal. She crouched by the wreckage, finger tracing a bullet hole clean through the driver's door. The precision was chilling. Whoever had done this wasn't sloppy. She spotted something glinting beneath the ash. A small dog tag half buried. She brushed the soot away and froze. It was Hayes's. The name was one she didn't recognize, foreign but familiar in a way she couldn't place. She pocketed it, heart pounding. The implications gnawed at her. Someone wants us to find this, she thought, but why? A faint sound reached her, so soft it might have been the wind, a distant, muffled cry. She signaled the others and they fanned out. The cry came again, clearer this time, a single word in broken English. Help. They followed it to a shallow pit beside the ravine. Beneath a camo tarp, a young private lay bleeding from a leg wound. His face was pale, lips blue. He looked barely 18. Lena knelt beside him. "You're okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. They knew," he rasped. We didn't stand a chance." His eyes darted wildly, then locked onto hers. "There's someone on the inside." Her stomach clenched. She wanted to press him, demand a name, but his gaze went distant. A final exhale left his chest, and then nothing. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke and earth. Malik cursed softly under his breath. Rays covered her mouth, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. Lena closed the private's eyes and stood, fingers curling into fists. The world around her seemed suddenly sharper, the sky too bright, the air too cold. Somewhere far off, a low rumble of artillery echoed. The war moved on, indifferent to their small heartbreak. She thought of her father again, of unanswered questions and silent rooms, of the feeling that the truth had always been just out of reach. She wouldn't let that happen again. She turned to Malik and Ray's, voice low but steady. "We're not reporting this yet, not until we know who's playing us." Malik's brow furrowed. "That's dangerous, Lena. So is trusting the wrong people." For a long moment none of them spoke. The wind howled across the ravine, rattling loose stones. Then Ray squared her shoulders. "What's the plan?" Lena looked east once more. The horizon shimmered in the midday heat like a mirage. Beneath her resolve, fear gnawed at the edges, but she let it live there. Fear kept her human. Fear kept her sharp. She slung her rifle and started walking. "We follow the tracks," she said, "and when we find who did this, we make sure their silence isn't the last word." The sky above seemed endless, pale blue stretching beyond sight. Somewhere in that vastness, she thought she could hear her father's voice, quiet, steady, a reminder that even in the graveyards of battlefields, rebellion could still pulse beneath the ruins. And so she walked, a lone figure against an unforgiving horizon, carrying both her team's fragile hope and the ghost of a promise she had yet to fulfill. The ridge ahead was jagged and steep, casting long shadows across the valley as the sun began to dip westward. Lena felt the weight of every step press into her thighs. Each breath burned her lungs, but she didn't slow. Malik and Ray's trailed just behind, their silence saying what words couldn't. A hawk circled overhead. Its shadow skimmed the rocks, fleeting and watchful. For a moment, she envied the bird's detachment, its freedom from the ground-bound grief they carried. They followed the tracks through a narrow pass where the wind howled like a distant siren. The ground here was littered with shell casings and fragments of old, rusting equipment, remnants of forgotten battles. Lena's boot kicked a bent dog tag half buried in the dirt. She left it where it lay. "Who do you think it is?" Ray's asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind. Lena glanced back. "The leak." Ray's nodded. Lena hesitated. Nomming a suspect too soon felt like poison. "I don't know," she said, "but whoever it is, they're close enough to read our orders." Malik's brow furrowed. "Hayes." The suggestion hung there, heavy and bitter. Lena shook her head, though doubt pricked at her. "Hayes has saved our skins too many times." But she remembered the dog tag she'd pocketed, the foreign name etched into its metal, and the way the private's last words had trembled with certainty. Someone on the inside. The thought gnawed at her like hunger. The pass narrowed further, forcing them into single file. The walls closed in, towering cliffs streaked with iron-red veins. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air, old blood or rust, She couldn't tell. A sudden crack of stone above. Lena froze, instinct screaming. "Down," she hissed. A boulder crashed onto the path where she'd stood, splintering into shards. Dust billowed. Another rock followed, then another, an ambush from above. They dove for cover against the cliff face. Malik fired upward, muzzle flashes lighting the canyon walls. A fleeting silhouette darted between rocks at the rim, a sniper or spotter but too quick to track. The assault lasted seconds, then silence reclaimed the canyon, broken only by the echo of falling pebbles. Ray's breathing was ragged. They knew we'd follow. Lena scanned the rim, pulse racing. "They're hurting us," she whispered. "This isn't random." Malik grimaced. "Then let's not give them what they want." But the terrain offered no easy escape, only forward or back, and retreat meant leaving Hayes's fate unknown. Lena's gut twisted. She remembered her father's missing plane. Retreat had been the choice back then. Wait, stand down, let the higher-ups handle it. It had left her with nothing but questions. She wouldn't repeat that mistake. She signaled them to move forward. As dusk settled, they emerged from the canyon onto a plateau overlooking a bombed-out industrial complex. The skeletal remains of buildings jutted against the fatting sky. Faint lights flickered in the distance, impossible to tell if they were friendly or not. Malik crouched beside her. "That could be where they took Hayes." "Or where they're waiting for us," Ray's muttered. Lena studied the layout through her scope. The air smelled of oil and damp concrete. Somewhere in the distance, a metal door slammed, echoing like a gunshot. She lowered the scope and closed her eyes briefly. Her father's face surfaced unbidden, smiling, calm, just before his final mission. She wondered if he had felt this same sick tension in his gut. "Rays," she said softly, "when we go in, you take the west flank. Malik, cover her. If I signal, pull back, don't argue." Rays hesitated. "You're thinking this could be a trap?" Lena nodded once. "And you're going in anyway," Malik said. Her gaze swept the ruined horizon. "If it's a trap, better me than all of us." They exchanged a look, part protest, part reluctant respect. She began the descent toward the complex, every step measured, senses sharpened by adrenaline. The wind had stilled, leaving only the distant hum of machinery, or maybe just her imagination. Inside the outer yard, the smell of burnt metal and old fuel clung to the air. Rusted barrels were stacked haphazardly, casting long shadows under the moon's rising glow. A faint whisper of movement. She froze, pressing herself against a crumbling wall. Voices, low, speaking a language she barely recognized. She risked a glance. Two figures in mismatched gear, rifles slung carelessly, walking the perimeter. Mercenaries, maybe, not standard troops. She waited until they passed, then slipped deeper into the complex. The walls here bore faded warnings and bullet holes, relics of an older war. A flicker of light drew her to a doorway. She peered inside, a large, empty room lit by a single swaying bulb. On the floor in the dust lay a map. She crouched, fingers brushing its edges. The map wasn't of this region. It was of her father's last known flight path. Her breath caught. In the corner of the map, a symbol had been drawn, a small, crude hawk. The same emblem her father had painted on his helmet years ago. Her chest tightened. This wasn't coincidence. Someone wanted her to see this. Behind her, a soft click of metal. She spun, rifle up, and froze. Captain Hayes stood there, hands raised, face grim and shadowed. "Put it down, Lena," he said quietly. She didn't lower the weapon. "Where's the team?" Hayes's jaw worked, but he didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. "You don't understand what's happening," he said finally. "This is bigger than us, bigger than command." Her pulse roared in her ears. "Then make me understand." His eyes flicked toward the map at her feet. "It didn't end with your father's flight. He found something out here, something they buried. They're still burying it." A distant shout outside cut through the moment. Footsteps approached, more mercenaries. Hayes stepped closer, urgency in his tone. "You can't trust anyone in our chain, not even." The door burst open. Lena fired instinctively, dropping the first man through the threshold. Hayes grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a side exit. They sprinted into the yard as gunfire erupted around them, bullets sparking against concrete. Malik's rifle cracked from a distant rooftop. "Cover fire." Ray's voice shouted her name from the west flank. They dove behind a rusted vehicle, hearts pounding. Hayes pressed a bloodied hand to his side. He'd been grazed. Lena's mind spun. Betrayal, her father's ghost, Hayes's warning, the hawk emblem, all threads in a web she couldn't yet untangle. But she knew one thing for certain: the battlefield wasn't just a graveyard tonight. It was a message. And whatever truth pulsed beneath its ruins, she wasn't going to let it die quietly. The yard was chaos. Sporadic gunfire crackled against the skeletal buildings, the metallic clang echoing like church bells across the plateau. Lena's ears rang as she ducked lower behind the rusted vehicle, pulling Hayes down with her. The acrid smell of gunpowder and oil clung to the air. Malik's voice hissed over the comms, 2 tangos down, east wall. But we've got movement, more coming from the north. Ray's breathing was quick in Lena's earpiece. "I'm pinned at the west flank. They're pushing hard. If I move, I'm exposed." Lena peeked over the edge, 3 mercenaries advancing through the shadows, rifles ready. She steadied her breath, lined up the first shot, and squeezed the trigger. The muzzle flash illuminated her face for a heartbeat. The man dropped. She shifted, another shot, another body crumpled. The third dove for cover. Hayes grunted, pressing his wounded side. "We can't hold this position." "No," Lena said, scanning for an escape route. Her eyes locked on a darkened loading bay at the far end of the complex. "Over there, move when I say." She fired a burst at the remaining mercenary, forcing him to keep his head down, then grabbed Hayes's arm. "Go." They sprinted, boots hammering against cracked concrete, bullets chasing them. The world became a blur of sparks, shadows, and the pounding of her heartbeat. A ricochet sang past her ear, close enough to sting. They dove through the loading bay door, slamming it behind them. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Faint shafts of moonlight cut through holes in the roof, illuminating abandoned crates and machinery. Hayes leaned against a wall, grimacing. "This wasn't supposed to happen. I was trying to." She cut him off with a sharp whisper. "Save it, we're not clear yet." In the silence that followed, she could hear the faint scuttle of rats somewhere in the darkness. The quiet felt almost too complete, too rehearsed. Malik's voice broke the tension over comms. "We've got a lull. West is secure for now. Ray's is safe." Lena exhaled slowly, relief tempered by suspicion. She knelt to check Hayes's wound. The graze was ugly but not fatal. Still, the blood soaking his sleeve was a grim reminder of how close they'd come. Hayes watched her work, his face lined with something heavier than pain. "Your father wasn't supposed to find out either," he murmured. Her hands froze. "You knew." "I didn't know until after his flight went missing," Hayes said quietly. "They said it was a storm, a navigational error, but when I saw that hawk symbol surface again," his voice caught. "I started digging, and tonight, this was my way of showing you without raising alarms." Lena's chest tightened. Her father's hawk emblem, the planted dog tag, the staged ambush. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a message. Someone was still out there orchestrating shadows. She forced herself to stand, pushing down the tremor in her hands. "We're getting out of here. Then you're going to tell me everything." A low hum cut through the night outside, a vehicle engine growing closer. Malik's urgent whisper came through the comms. "Lena, we've got a truck approaching fast, not ours." She glanced around the loading bay. A back door stood ajar, leading into a narrow alley between buildings. She signaled Hayes and moved, her boots crunching softly on broken glass. The air outside was colder, sharper. The sky above had clouded over, erasing the moonlight. They crept through the alley, every shadow a potential threat. The truck's engine roared closer, then idled. Men shouted in a language she couldn't place. The mercenaries were regrouping. Ahead, Malik and Reyes appeared from behind a collapsed wall, their faces pale but determined. Malik's rifle was slung low, his eyes scanning constantly. Reyes's lip was split, a streak of dried blood on her cheek. "You okay?" Reyes asked, voice low. "For now," Lena said, her gaze swept the group. "We need distance, South Ridge, 3 clicks." They moved, slipping from shadow to shadow until the complex was a dark smear behind them. The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of smoke and something chemical, acrid. They reached a dry creek bed and paused, catching their breath. The stars above had emerged through a break in the clouds, cold and distant. Malik broke the silence. "So Hayes was the leak." Hayes shook his head. "No, I was trying to get ahead of whoever's feeding intel to the other side. I knew Lena would follow." His gaze flicked toward her. "They want you to stop asking questions about your father." Lena's jaw clenched. "Then they don't know me at all." Reyes shifted uneasily. "If command's compromised, who can we trust?" No one answered. The weight of that truth pressed on them like the cold night air. In the distance, a faint flash of light pulsed on the horizon, silent but unmistakable. Artillery, a flare, or something else entirely. Lena stared at it, her mind turning over possibilities. She thought of her father again, his laugh, his quiet determination. She remembered the last letter he'd sent, the one she'd kept folded in her vest pocket for years. "Stay curious, even when it's dangerous." She touched the pocket now, feeling the worn paper through the fabric. The memory steadied her. "We find whoever did this," she said softly, "and we finish what my father started." The creek bed stretched ahead, twisting like a scar across the land. They began walking, their footsteps crunching softly on gravel. The world felt vast and empty, yet somewhere out there, a pulse of rebellion still beat beneath the ruins. Above them a hawk cried, a sound so clear it felt like an omen. Lena glanced up, following its path across the stars. For a fleeting moment, the grief in her chest loosened, replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. They kept moving south, 4 shadows against a battlefield that refused to sleep. The silence between them wasn't absence, it was promise. Something was coming and they would be ready. The first rays of dawn bled across the horizon, washing the ridge in pale gold. Lena's boots crunched on frost-hardened gravel as she led the group south. Her shoulders ached under the weight of her pack, but she kept her pace steady. Behind her, Malik muttered under his breath, some half-prayer, half-curse. Reyes's breaths came in quiet bursts. Hayes limped, his face ashen but unreadable. The land seemed endless. Rolling hills scarred by old shell impacts, burned-out vehicles scattered like bones. Somewhere in that broken landscape was a truth that had been buried too long. A cold wind whipped past, carrying the smell of dust and smoke. The sound of the hawk's cry from hours before still echoed in Lena's mind. It had felt like her father's voice, a sign, or maybe just her longing. She slowed, scanning the ridge ahead. The tracks they had been following veered east again, fresh, deliberate. She crouched, fingers brushing the prints in the dirt. The pattern was strange, the spacing too even, too neat, as if someone wanted to make sure they were seen. "Another breadcrumb," she murmured. Malik knelt beside her, brow furrowed. "It's a setup." "Everything is," Hayes said quietly. "But we keep going, they're not done talking to us." Reyes's voice was thin, tired. "Or they're luring us to finish the job." The group pressed on. As the sun climbed higher, the air warmed just enough to carry the distant rumble of engines. They froze, crouching among the rocks. 2 armored vehicles crawled along a distant road, their silhouettes stark against the pale sky. Lena held her breath until they disappeared beyond a ridge. When they resumed walking, the silence between them was thick, but not empty. It carried every unspoken fear, every small hope. Around midday, they found the outpost. It was hidden in a hollow between two hills, camouflaged by netting and debris. Smoke rose faintly from a barrel outside, a makeshift signal or just someone trying to stay warm. Lena signaled the others to hold position. She slung her rifle and crept closer, staying low. Her boots slid quietly across loose gravel. Inside the hollow, a lone figure sat by the fire, an older man in tattered fatigues. His beard was streaked with gray, his face weathered but alert. A battered rifle rested across his knees. When he saw her, he didn't reach for it. Instead, he raised a trembling hand. "You're her," he said, voice hoarse. Elena's stomach tightened. "Who are you?" The man's eyes glimmered in the firelight. "Call me Vargo. I flew with your father." The world seemed to tilt. The air left her lungs in a single sharp exhale. She stepped closer, rifle lowered but not dropped. "That's impossible. My father's crew." "Dead?" Vargo's cracked lips twitched into a bitter smile. "That's what they told you." Hayes and the others approached cautiously, weapons ready but curiosity winning over suspicion. Vargo's gaze shifted between them. He found something, coordinates, proof that the war wasn't what they said. He didn't crash because of a storm, he was shot down. Elena's chest burned with equal parts anger and hope. Who pulled the trigger? Vargo poked at the fire with a stick, embers sparking. "Not the enemy you think. A ghost unit. Black contracts. They've been cleaning up loose ends for years." Ray's voice trembled. "And now us." Vargo nodded slowly. "You're walking evidence." Malik's jaw tightened. "Then why talk to us?" "Because I'm done running." Vargo's eyes locked on Lena. "Your father saved my life once. I couldn't save his, but I can give you this." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered drive. "Everything I know, coordinates, names, the hawk, your father's emblem, is the key to their safe house." Lena took the drive, her fingers brushing the cold metal. It felt heavier than its size. A sudden crack split the air, a rifle shot, distant but deadly. Vargo jerked backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. "Sniper!" Malik shouted, diving for cover. They scattered, gunfire ripping across the hollow. Dirt sprayed into the air as rounds struck the ground around them. Lena dragged Vargo behind a rock, but his breathing was already shallow. His eyes found hers one last time. "Don't let it die," he whispered, and then his chest stilled. Rage flared hot in her chest, but training kept her focused. She scanned the ridges, there, a glint of sunlight off a scope. She lined up her rifle, steadied her breath, and fired. A distant figure crumpled. The gunfire ceased. Silence reclaimed the hollow, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Ray's knelt beside Vargo, her hands shaking. He didn't even get a chance. Lena swallowed hard, sliding the drive into a secure pocket. "He gave us enough." Hayes limped to her side, eyes dark. "Now the clock's ticking. They know we have it." The wind picked up, carrying ash and the faint smell of burning wood. Lena looked down at Vargo's still form, then out at the distant horizon. She thought of her father's voice again, and for the first time it didn't sound like a memory. It sounded like a command. "We finish this," she whispered, "no matter what it costs." Malik placed a hand on Ray's shoulder, grounding them all. The moment stretched, quiet but heavy, before they turned south once more. The battlefield around them was still a graveyard, but beneath the weight of loss, Lena felt her pulse, steady, defiant, a rebellion refusing to end. She stood on the fractured tarmac, boots sinking slightly into the rain-softened gravel, as the last traces of smoke rose like ghosts from the hills beyond. The battlefield was quieter now, but the silence didn't soothe her, it pressed in. Somewhere far off, a single crow cried, its wings slicing the heavy sky. Lena tightened the strap of her pack, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulder where the rifle always bit. "Ready?" a voice asked softly. She turned to see Ramos, his uniform torn at the knee, his face hollowed by exhaustion and loss. He wasn't asking about her gear. He was asking if she could walk back onto soil that had nearly swallowed her. She nodded once, a small, deliberate motion. The village lay ahead, a place that had been more than coordinates on a map. Lena could still see the small window of a home where a child had once waved at their convoy. That window was gone now, replaced by a blackened gap. The mission had been completed, the target neutralized, but the cost hung over them like the smell of gunpowder. They moved through the ruins quietly, their steps respectful, as if disturbing the broken earth might wake old spirits. Elena's breath caught when she saw the melted remains of a bicycle leaning against a collapsed wall. She thought of her brother, of the bike he'd crashed when he was 12, and of the promise she'd made to him the night before his deployment, that she would follow his path, keep his memory alive. She crouched near a fragment of stone carved with unfamiliar script. She brushed away ash with her fingers, the letters like whispers she could not understand. A faint breeze carried the scent of rain and something older, burned wood, lost voices. Ramos stopped beside her. "You don't have to stay," he said. "We'll handle the cleanup." But she didn't move. Her throat was tight, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low. "This place, it deserves more than a cleanup." He didn't argue. They stood there together, not as soldiers, but as two people who had seen too much. Behind them, the other survivors began setting up a small marker, a simple wooden cross made from broken beams. One of the younger medics, Harper, whispered a few words, clumsy, heartfelt, apologetic. Lena placed a single dog tag beside the cross. It wasn't her brother. It belonged to a man she'd barely known, a man who had saved her life 2 nights ago. She didn't know if anyone would ever come searching for him, but she knew this: he mattered. The sky cracked open briefly, sunlight spilling through as if testing the earth again. It lit the hills in gold, the ruins in a fragile glow. Ramos took off his helmet, closing his eyes against the light. Lena stepped back and looked one last time at the graveyard they'd survived. She thought of the girl she'd been when she first raised her hand to serve, the one who believed missions were clean, victories simple. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, harder, but also, strangely, more tender. As the unit began their slow walk back toward the convoy, Lena paused. Her pulse was steady, but it carried something fierce, a small, defiant heartbeat against the vast, indifferent world. She whispered to the empty air, to her brother, to the ghosts that lingered. "We're still here." No one heard it but the wind. The convoy rumbled to life, engines growling low against the hills. Lena climbed aboard the rear vehicle, settling into the worn seat. Through the open hatch, she watched the sun break free from the clouds, spilling light across the broken ground. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The battlefield faded behind them, but the memory stayed sharp. The smell of rain on ash, the weight of a dog tag in her hand, the echo of her own heartbeat refusing to quit. Somewhere out there, another mission would call. Another promise would demand its price. For now, though, she let herself breathe, just once deeply. The rebellion was still alive, quiet, steady, and unyielding. Her pulse carried it forward.